and to my sons John and Richard £10 when they reach the age of 21. To my darling wife Cassandra, all my goods and chattels, providing she doesn't marry until the will is proven. Cassandra comes later on in another one of the buildings I'll be talking about. Okay? The wonderful thing there is that 1665, it's the innkeeper. And if you've got a map of Hensford and you've got the probate will at the same time, the only pub in Hensford that's got a brook near it is the Cross Keys Inn. That will doesn't mention the key, the name of the pub, but the two put together means you've got the Cross Keys Inn. Bit of detective, which I tend to like when I'm writing history. We have that then. So I've got it down right then to 1665. In 1666, there's a half tax. Every building in the country was given a tax considering the number of hearths or fireplaces they had in the building. And the Cross Keys had 4. And it was run by Thomas Everson. He had to pay the tax. So that's double proof that it was Everson who was the landlord of the Cross Keys. Now, keeping that same theory going on through, and I haven't printed them all up, but there are loads of them, I worked out that various other landlords, you could almost track the pub landlords down through the ages until you get to 1746. Now, if you know the Cross Keys, or if you've ever been past, there is a plaque on the front of the Cross Keys. And on that plaque has got 1746, because that is the building that it stands there now. The old building, most of it was taken down, and the new building was put in its place, 1746. And the landlord at the time was, I'm losing down here, William Thomas was the landlord at the time. Now, quite interesting, his wife's name was Catherine. Now, if you look above the plaque, the date, it's got W.T.C. William and Catherine Thomas. Hopefully. However, it was a coaching inn. And there was a coaching company in Birmingham that ran the route all the way through here and down to the Cross Keys, and that was the Taylor Wagon Company. So, did the Taylor Wagon Company pay for the building of the Cross Keys, or did Thomas and his wife pay for the rebuilding of the place? We're not sure, and I've never been able to find out. But his will also reads, the last will and testament again of Thomas of Hensford in the county of Stafford, inholder. Again, inholder, it doesn't mention the name. I give and bequeath them to my brother Joseph Thomas of Birmingham in the county of Warwick, and to my brother-in-law John Offey of Merrydale in the county of Stafford, all my several parcels of land called the Berries and the Berry. Now, I came across a bill of sale for the Cross Keys 100 years later to that, and strange enough, what appears there, the plots of land that are to be sold, 2 of them are called the Berries and the Berry. Again, proof that even though he's not, the inn isn't named, William is in fact landlord of the Cross Keys. Okay? Again, I say it's a bit like being a detective, piecing bits and odds and ends together. And the annoying thing is, every time I write a book, I find another piece of information out. And it's most frustrating at times. I can go to the racing book I did years ago, could never find out what happened to one particular jockey. And 2 years after the book had been out for quite a time, I found that he died in France. it was in the paper, a very tiny little bit in one of the local papers. He died in France. So you think, something I missed. But you've got to just go ahead and produce a book. Okay, so we're now up to 1746. Okay, now the first landlord we actually know was definitely the landlord there, because he's in the local census reports, is John Massey in the 1830s and 40s. He's the landlord there, and actually him and his wife Sarah have run the pub for about 20 years. And John Massey is responsible for starting race meetings at Hensford, on Hensford Hills. He actually involves himself in starting the races. He puts up the fencing and so on for the races, along with a partner. And then their reward at the end of the race meeting, which is about 2 or 3 days long, is they have a big shindig at the Cross Keys. So he gets the profit from that. Okay. Hensford actually has got quite a few ladies that I call very, very independent ladies. Sarah Massey was one of them. When her husband died, one might have expected Sarah to pack the inn in and go somewhere else, back to relatives. She actually carried on running the Cross Keys on her own for the next 10 years. Quite a feat for a lady in those times. 2 or 3 others. We've got a lady horse trainer in Hensford. And we've got another lady whose husband died, and he ran another stables in Hensford, and she carried on running the stables. You tend to think women are sort of downtrodden, but history actually proves sometimes that they're not as downtrodden as we think. During its history in the 1850s, it got quite a funny reputation. A certain William Palmer frequented the inn. He had quite a few of his, particularly after he'd won money, he had quite a few of his little parties there. And he was quite welcomed by the landlord, at this time as a John Wilkins. But he was responsible for, I suppose, one of the rumours of hauntings happens there, because one of his nights there, he was confronted by a rather drunken navvy. And that navvy disappeared. He went to the toilet round the back and was never seen again. Rumour had it that Palmer did him in and got rid of the body. And that toilet was supposed to be haunted for the rest of the time. You know, it's one of these, everywhere's got a haunting if you're not careful. Whether that happened or not, we're not sure. Another chap that came there under Palmer's sort of presence was Bob Bettle. I don't know whether you know of that. He was the All England boxing champion, bare knuckle boxing. And he frequented the Cross Keys along with Palmer. The Cross Keys actually became quite well known for gambling and betting. And I will show you that in a few minutes. But while Wilkins was there as the landlord, we have the rather famous case of the racehorse Jealousy that won the Grand National. And it was claimed that Jealousy was trained at the Cross Keys. I proved that it wasn't, much to my own annoyance with it, my own thing of proving Hensford hadn't done something wonderful, but I proved that it wasn't. And it was in the Victoria County history. The Jealousy was trained at the Cross Keys by John Wilkins. What had actually happened was the trainers of Jealousy had come up from London, the Balchin family, who owned the horse and trained it. And rather than go the full journey to Liverpool, they stayed at the Cross Keys overnight with the horse. So it was stabled there. And also the jockey who was going to ride it in the National lodged at the Cross Keys. That was Joseph Kendall. So quite possibly Kendall took the horse out on Hensford Hills for a bit of a ride to keep it, fit. But the rumour came about that it had been trained at the Cross Keys by Wilkins. It's nice to know that the Victoria County History have had to change their book. It no longer appears that it actually was trained by John Wilkins. In fact, the strange fact is that Kendall wasn't supposed to ride it anyway. But the guy who was supposed to ride it had an accident the night before, and Kendall rode it. He had ridden it the year before and won races on it. Okay. Wonderful things and rumours got flying around, and I was talking to an old gentleman years ago who had a hand. He worked, I don't know whether you know, he owned the carpenter shop next to the plough as you're going into Hensford, up the hill, next to the plough. There used to be an old carpenter's place and a forge there as well. And then you go down the hill into Hensford. And he owned that business. And he said they were given the job of refurbishing the Cross Keys. And while they were taking the floor up in parts, because it needed replacing, they came across quite a few chicken feathers. And they wondered what they were, or why they were there. Well, apparently the Cross Keys had quite a reputation as cockfighting. And if you wanted to take your prize bird there and have a good night and hopefully win money, you went there. It saved you actually on a nasty night being on Hensford Hills, because there is an area of Hensford Hills called Cockpit Valley. And that apparently was used for cockfighting, and young kids were paid money to look at that, keep an eye out for the local police. And if the police came, they came running on, said the police, and everybody got up quick and went to get everything with them. Well, I was a bit doubtful about these rumours, about this cockfighting and the feathers and that. Being a historian, one of the things you learn to be sometimes is a little bit sort of doubtful when you're given information. Particularly sometimes I've been given information which has proved totally wrong. I came across an article in the Sporting Times. In 1900, this article was written, and it's about the Cross Keys Inn and various people who used it. But the interesting thing is, it goes to say, in those days, the 1860s, 1870s, the man who passed the Cross Keys without getting down to see what the clock said would have been denied the benefit of the clergy and have received some sort of bomb by an early post. That's their excuse for getting off and they're going having a drink, by the way. So a halt was made at the popular hostelry. The horse and gig were sent on to the stables, and the poor stiff was placed, for want of a better place, on the tap room table. They were taking a body to the coroner's place to be examined. They stopped off at the Keys and decided to, rather than have the body out in the open, they took it into the pub and shoved it on the tap room table. The Cross Keys, by the way, was used quite often for inquests. It said the room was tolerably well filled at the time, and other gay and festive friends kept dropping in. Of course, the conversation soon turned to cockfighting. And equally, of course, nearly every member of the company carried a bit of the game, ready dubbed in his coat pocket. So they soon got to work. Main after main was fought on that taproom table. The tragic event of the day was clean forgotten as the strong ale and the brown brandy were circulated. The reek of tobacco smoke and ardent spirits became intolerable to young Master Porter. And when about midnight the trainer condescended to accompany him home, the corpse of the suicide, still on the taproom table, was completely hidden from view by a dense shroud of feathers. So they actually fought over the body. They got the body lying there, and they carried on with their game. So actually, things like that, you do occasionally find proof. You know, that, as I say, in the Sporting Times, strangely enough, our local papers, well, they didn't start in the Cannock area until the 1870s, 1880s, but they didn't have much about various events like that. You have to go to Yorkshire papers, believe it or not, to get a lot about Hensford's, particularly horse racing. You have to go all the way to get the Yorkshire Post and things like that. So, in fact, that takes us up to about, was it, 1880. Then the next landlord of any interest is a chap called Noah Corbett. Now, Noah Corbett was landlord for about 20 or 30 years at the turn of the century. At the time when he took over the Cross Keys, Hensford Football Club, which had started, actually ran from the Anglesey. In the at the back of the Anglesey, there was a football pitch laid out, and it was nicknamed the Tins. And the team ran from there. Noah persuaded the team to move from the Anglesey and go down to the Cross Keys. And the reason and how he did that was he promised them a free pint at the end of every match. So, of course, the team went, you know, quick way about getting a pint at the end of the match. And of course, we know now they stayed there for nearly 100 years. That must have been a pretty good free pint. Yeah, they stayed there until, I think, was it something, until the Keys football ground was built. Now, that was sometime in the 1990s. So they actually stayed there nearly 100 years in the pub. Considering that team had a mascot, and the mascot was a goat. That's the Hensford football team. Now, during the miners' strike in 1926, the landlord who was there at the time, William Martin, the Martin family had taken over, he invited the local children for a free meal and like soup and that twice a week, on a Tuesday and a Friday. They never found the goat after some of those meals. The goat sort of disappeared. I think most people realised where the goat had actually gone. It had gone into the kiddies' drink, into the kiddies' meal. He was very, very good. Was Martin. They also, in fact, they ran quite a few things for the local children, and of course they also helped with things like hospital bills. So it was quite not only a pub, but it was quite a sort of what's the word, social place as well. The final thing we know about, not the final, sorry, 1960s, I mentioned to someone, the only picture I found of the Cross Keys full on, you've got pictures in that booklet there of it at the side, full on picture is one I took myself in the 1960s. And I haven't put it in there because it's just a tiny picture of it. It is in that book. Okay, and it was all boarded up. The place was boarded up because in the 1960s, Cannock Council, in their wisdom, was trying to demolish anything of any history. They succeeded in Cannock. Cannock lost an awful lot of his old buildings, and they must have tried to start on Hensford. But fortunately, uproar happened because the Quays was one of the oldest buildings in the place, in Hensford. And it was actually saved from being demolished. It carried on then, it reopened after it was refurbished, it reopened, but in the 1990s, another builder chanced his arm. He wanted to buy the place, and I think he actually put an offer in to buy it. And his idea was that he was going to refurbish it. But his idea of refurbishment was to pull it down and build a new one that looked quite like the old one. Now, that's not history. You know, once you've pulled something down, the history's gone. So again, he was stopped. And fortunately, his purchase of the place was not allowed to happen. And a new owner was found who actually simply converted it and kept the building, at least the outside, and most of the inside was kept as it was. So if you go to the Cross Quays today, you'll find that the majority of the place looks very much like it was in the 1740s, 1750s. The rooms are virtually the same. That is the Cross Quays. Would anyone like to ask any questions before I go on to the next one? Remember, we're talking about old Hensford at all, completely.